Using a playbook that dates back a century, free speech in America isn't being taken by force, it's being given up through fear. Self-censorship is killing discourse, and YouTube could be next. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. If you don't want to watch this video, I totally understand it. Skip it and go to the next one, but I feel it is incumbent on me to talk about the First Amendment in the United States and the danger that we are under, and the fact that in 3 years, I may not be able to make this video. So I think it is super important that I talk about this. I'm going to try to keep the video brief and to the point, and I'm not going to add a lot of flash like B-roll and things like that. There are plenty of other places you can go for doing that. I want to begin by reading the First Amendment of the United States because I think it's important that we all understand the exact wording of the First Amendment and how important it is to the United States before we continue with this discussion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and this is the important part, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the important phrase for what we're discussing today is very, very brief: abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. In other words, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It's that brief and that direct. So that's the First Amendment. It is nearly 250 years old and still one of the strongest free speech protections anywhere in the world. Most countries don't have anything like that, and I think the people in the United States don't realize this. Most countries do not have a statement this clearly against abridging the freedom of speech and of the press. So this principle is core to America's identity, and yet today it is being eroded not by laws directly, but by fear, which is much more insidious. There are many fronts upon which this is happening, but I want to talk specifically about three in this case: Columbia University, Jimmy Kimmel, and Stephen Colbert. I'll start with the two late-night comedians. I think everybody knows right now that Jimmy Kimmel was basically put on indefinite hiatus by Disney/ABC for saying something that was, quote, inappropriate or went over the line or something like that. But that was after not-so-veiled threats by the FCC chair, and previously, earlier this summer, Stephen Colbert's show was canceled. He does have a year, but it will be canceled in a year. So that late night comedy show as well was canceled. Now, of course, late night comedy has a fairly liberal bent, and these comedians have been going after the president and the government pretty, ferociously over the past actually 8 years, 10 years or so. And of course, previous to that as well. But the government does not take kindly to this comedy and have therefore put a lot of pressure on companies like Disney and Paramount to silence these critics. And the companies have caved into this pressure and, of course, silenced these critics. And then, of course, we have Columbia University, one of the flagship universities in the United States, which folded under federal pressure and has disciplined students and faculty and has paid a $200 million settlement. There was no law passed, there was no ban, there was just fear on the part of the administration, and of course, the university silenced itself. So what is the problem with this? There has been no congressional law that has been put into place abridging freedom of speech. The problem is that fear and coercion have been used to create a situation in which self-censorship is happening. And no matter what your opinion about the late night comedians, and no matter what your opinion about what Columbia University is teaching, and remember, it's a huge university, they teach everything. So there is stuff going on all the time. There's individual faculty who are teaching anything from computer science and physics to political science to, on and on and on to underwater basket weaving probably. So it's a gigantic university, but the university and these corporations are clearly not going to stand up to the kind of pressure that's being put on them, and they're attempting to curry favor with the administration by censoring themselves. Now, censorship from the outside, censorship from a centralized government is terrible. It is a terrible thing, but self-censorship is far more insidious because it's something where the government itself, the entity that is forcing that type of censorship, can hold up their hands and say, we have no responsibility for this, while they're actually getting what they want out of this, which is the abridgment of freedom of speech. And if you want a historical parallel, let's dial things back just about 100 years. I don't make this comparison lightly at all, and in fact, I really don't want to talk about it, but history shows us exactly what happens when free speech collapses under fear, and I'm of course talking about Germany in the late 1920s and early 1930s, where first comedians and then journalists and intellectuals were silenced via coercion. Institutions gave in thinking that compliance would protect them, and obviously it didn't. Self-censorship paved the way for authoritarianism that took place and led directly to World War II and the atrocities of the Nazi Party. Now, of course, we are nowhere near that outcome today, but the mechanics of what's going on, the pressure, the fear, the silence, they look frighteningly familiar. And that's why what's happening at Columbia, Paramount, ABC, and quite soon possibly YouTube and Alphabet matters a lot. Free societies can slip away faster than anyone expects if you're not vigilant about it. So let's remember that historically, corporations are basically chickens. They are not going to stand up to an authoritarian government. They're going to try to cover themselves and not ruffle any feathers. So do not expect these companies to come to our defense of free speech. They're going to do what's best for their shareholders and for maintaining profitability and keeping the company out of trouble. They are not going to stand up to this type of authoritarian overreach. And with that in mind, let's talk about YouTube. You got to remember that Alphabet, which is YouTube's parent corporation, of course, the parent corporation of Google as well, is not your friend. It's a corporation and it will protect itself. Now, I know I view YouTube as a collection of individuals that are talking. I have a parasocial relationship with a lot of people. In other words, I think I know them because they're there and they talk to me all the time, right? Similar situation to you watching me as well. That parasocial relationship is great, but that relationship is all enabled by a gigantic corporation that could easily fall afoul of the federal government. And what happens if, say, YouTube folds to the pressure? They don't even have to do it in a very explicit way. They can just change their algorithm a bit to negate the reach of voices that are critical of the government. And that could happen. It could happen very easily. You might not even know about it. Suddenly your feed just changes and you don't see things you used to. So government pressure in the form of antitrust threats, calling certain voices on YouTube threats or terrorists or something like that, or boycotts, etc., could cause Alphabet and YouTube to cave to this pressure and to perform this sort of self-censorship where they just remove the voices that are critical of the government. That could happen, and it actually might be already. Already, creators whisper about shadow bans and demonization, and mark my words, 3 years from now, I may not be able to even upload this video. In fact, I'm going to set a calendar reminder for 3 years from today, which would be September 21st, 2028, and we are going to revisit this. And I would say perhaps you should too. We can check back then in 3 years and hopefully discuss these matters publicly. I fear that we may have to do it in a different forum, much more privately. So why comedians and intellectuals first? Well, those are always the groups that go first, and then society at large follows. Comedy, if you look at it, has been banned by authoritarian governments more than any other form of communication because comedians will speak out to power. And then, of course, intellectuals follow that as well because they tend to be free thinkers and think their own thoughts rather than falling in line. So comedians and intellectuals, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Columbia University, you can see the pattern that has been established being followed again. Self-censorship does not feel like the law. Again, remember, nobody is making laws. Instead, it is self-imposed silence. But that silence is the death of democracy. If you don't have free speech, you don't have free press, you don't have an informed public, and that informed public is the democratic ideal. So folks, I did not want to make this video, but I feel like if I wait, I may not be able to in the future, and it is incumbent on me to speak out to that type of situation. We cannot count on corporations to fight for us. It's on us as individual citizens, specifically in the United States, but I would say everywhere in the world, to stand up for free speech. Remember that censorship is terrible, but self-censorship is worse, and it's already here. Will we as a society give in, or will we speak up while we still can? Let me know what you think about it.